down to his last $200, and facing eviction after losing his successful contracting business in an economic downturn, Marcus Bennett made a desperate decision to bid on an abandoned ranch at a government auction that everyone else avoided. What he discovered hidden behind a false wall in the basement would not only change his life forever, but would uncover a presidential secret that had remained hidden for over 7 decades. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Marcus Bennett stared at his bank account balance displayed on his smartphone screen. 243s. 76. Just 18 months ago, he had been the owner of Bennett Construction, a thriving business with 30 employees, several ongoing commercial projects, and a comfortable financial cushion. Now, at 45, he was sleeping on his brother's couch, showering at a local gym, and watching his remaining funds dwindle with each passing day. The recession had hit the construction industry particularly hard, but Marcus had been devastated by a perfect storm of misfortune. His largest client had filed for bankruptcy, leaving $300,000 in unpaid invoices. Then a severe storm had damaged uninsured equipment at his main worksite. The final blow came when his business partner embezzled what little operating capital remained before disappearing to parts unknown. Marcus had fought to save the business for months, draining his personal savings, selling his home at a loss, even liquidating his retirement accounts and paying the penalties. But in the end, Bennett Construction had collapsed, leaving Marcus with nothing but debts, a damaged reputation, and a profound sense of failure. His ex-wife Regina had offered financial help, but Marcus's pride wouldn't allow it. "You need to learn when to accept help," she had said during their last conversation. "This stubborn self-reliance will be your downfall." But pride was all Marcus had left. He refused to take handouts even from family. He was determined to rebuild his life through his own efforts, though he had no clear path forward. As Marcus sat in his brother's kitchen, absently scrolling through local news on his phone, a government auction notice caught his eye. Most of the listings were for tax-seized properties with starting bids far beyond his means, but one listing stood out: an abandoned ranch property called Willow Creek, located 70 miles outside the city. The minimum bid was just $200. The property description wasn't promising: 60-acre parcel with dilapidated main house, approx 2,400 sqft, 3 outbuildings in poor condition, no utilities currently connected, significant repairs needed. Throughout. Property sold as is, with no warranties expressed or implied. The accompanying photos showed a weathered 2-story farmhouse with a sagging roof, broken windows, and a wraparound porch that had partially collapsed. The outbuildings, a barn, a small cottage, and what appeared to be a storage shed, looked equally neglected. The land itself was overgrown, with what had once been pastures now reclaimed by nature. Marcus had grown up in a rural community before moving to the city to start his construction business. He had sworn never to return to country living, to the isolation and endless work of maintaining land. But now, with his options dwindling and his brother's patience wearing thin, even a rundown ranch seemed better than homelessness. The auction was scheduled for the following morning. Marcus spent the night researching Willow Creek Ranch, finding little beyond basic property records. The ranch had been seized by the government for unpaid taxes 3 years earlier, when the previous owner, an elderly man named Harold Donovan, had died without heirs. The property had been vacant since then, growing more dilapidated with each passing season. Marcus arrived at the county courthouse an hour before the auction, his remaining $1,243. 76 dice transferred to a cashier's check, the required payment method. The auction room was crowded with property investors, house flippers, and developers, all clutching bid cards and reviewing listing sheets. When the auctioneer reached Lot 37, Willow Creek Ranch, Marcus raised his bid card. $1,200, he called out, his voice steady despite his racing heart. The auctioneer glanced around the room. I have $1,200 for Lot 37. Do I hear $1,300? Marcus held his breath, waiting for someone to outbid him. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. Going once at $1,200, the auctioneer said. Going twice at $1,200. He brought down his gavel with a decisive crack. Sold to bidder number 184 for $1,200. As Marcus completed the paperwork and handed over his cashier's check, the clerk gave him an odd look. You know, Mr. Bennett, there's a reason nobody else bid on Willow Creek, she said quietly. Because it needs work? Marcus asked, signing the final form. The clerk hesitated. That's part of it. But there are also stories about the place. Old Donovan was a recluse, hardly ever came into town. Some folks say he was hiding something. Out there, Marcus forced a smile. Well, for $1,200, I'm willing to deal with a few ghost stories. The clerk shook her head. Just be careful out there. That property's been empty a long time. No telling what you might find. As Marcus drove the 70 miles to his new property, doubt began to creep in. Had he made another catastrophic mistake? He knew nothing about ranching, and his construction experience told him that the buildings would require extensive repairs just to be habitable. He had spent nearly every dollar he had on a property that might be beyond saving. When he finally turned onto the long gravel driveway, the reality of his purchase hit him full force. Willow Creek Ranch looked even more forsaken in person than it had in the auction photos. The main house stood atop a small rise, its white paint peeled away to expose weathered wood siding. The roof had visible holes, and several windows were broken or boarded up. The wraparound porch sagged dangerously on one side, and vegetation had grown up through the wooden steps. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. What have I done? Marcus whispered as he parked his truck and stepped out onto his new property. Armed with a flashlight and a crowbar, Marcus approached the main house. The front door was secured with a rusted padlock, which broke easily with one strike of the crowbar. The door creaked open to reveal a musty interior, thick with dust and cobwebs. The floorboards groaned beneath his weight as he stepped inside. The house had clearly been abandoned in haste. Furniture remained in place, though covered in dust. Sheets that had once been white but had yellowed with age. In what must have been the living room, a stone fireplace dominated one wall, while built-in bookshelves lined another. The kitchen contained ancient appliances from at least the 1970s, and the cabinets hung at odd angles, their contents long since removed. Marcus continued his exploration, finding 4 bedrooms upstairs, each with heavy wooden furniture that would have been valuable if not for the water damage from the leaking roof. The master bedroom contained a four-poster bed and an antique writing desk positioned before a large window that would have once provided views across the property. As daylight began to fade, Marcus returned to his truck to retrieve his sleeping bag and the small cooler of supplies he had brought. Though the house was in disrepair, it offered more shelter than his brother's couch had. He cleared a space in the living room, laid out his sleeping bag, and ate a cold dinner of sandwiches and bottled water by flashlight. That night, as he lay in the darkness listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the old house settling and the wind whistling through broken windows, Marcus wondered if he had made the biggest mistake of his life. The ranch had been affordable, yes, but was it simply a money pit that would drain what little resources he had left? Had his pride led him to another catastrophic decision? Morning came with shafts of sunlight streaming through broken windows, and gaps in the roof, illuminating dust particles dancing in the air. Despite a night of fitful sleep, Marcus woke with a renewed determination. He had made his choice, and now he had to make it work. He spent the day taking inventory of the property, starting with the main house. The structure, while neglected, had good bones. The foundation appeared solid, and the frame was intact despite the damage to the roof and siding. The plumbing was outdated but salvageable, and the electrical system would need to be completely rewired, but the conduits were in place. The barn, approximately 100 yards from the main house, was in similar condition. The roof had partially collapsed on one side, but the heavy timber frame remained sturdy. Inside, Marcus found old farming equipment, including a tractor that hadn't run in decades, and various implements whose purposes he could only guess at. The small cottage, which might have once housed ranch hands or guests, was in better shape than the main house, with only minor roof damage and windows that were dirty but intact. The storage shed contained a surprising treasure: tools, hammers, saws, wrenches and other implements hung neatly on wall-mounted pegboards, protected from the elements by the shed's sound roof. By evening, Marcus had a clearer picture of what he was facing. Willow Creek Ranch would require significant work to become habitable, but most of that work involved skills he already possessed. The property also had valuable assets: 60 acres of land, structures that could be restored rather than rebuilt, and even a well that, once cleaned out, could provide water independent of municipal systems. For the first time since his business had collapsed, Marcus felt a glimmer of hope. This forgotten ranch represented more than shelter; it offered purpose. Every repair, every improvement would be tangible progress toward rebuilding his life. As he prepared for his second night in the house, Marcus decided to explore the basement, an area he had only briefly checked during his initial inspection. The basement door was located off the kitchen, and the wooden stairs creaked ominously as he descended into the darkness, his flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. The basement was surprisingly large, extending beneath the entire footprint of the house. Unlike the upper floors, it was mostly empty, save for a few storage shelves and an ancient coal furnace that had long since been replaced by a more modern heating system. The walls were stone and mortar, typical of rural construction from the early 20th century, and the floor was packed earth in some areas and concrete in others. Marcus moved his flashlight beam methodically across the space, noting areas where the foundation might need repair. As the light passed across the far wall, something caught his attention: a section of stonework that appeared slightly different from the rest, with mortar that seemed newer, less weathered. Curious, Marcus approached the wall, running his hand along the stones. The difference was subtle, but unmistakable to someone with his construction background. This section of wall had been rebuilt, and relatively recently compared to the rest of the foundation. On closer inspection, Marcus noticed something else. A small gap at the edge of the newer stonework, barely visible, but deep enough to insert his fingers. Intrigued, he pulled gently. Nothing happened. He applied more pressure, and suddenly the entire section of wall pivoted inward on concealed hinges, revealing a hidden room beyond. Marcus stood frozen for a moment, his flashlight beam illuminating a space approximately 12 feet square. Unlike the rest of the basement, this room had a finished floor and plastered walls. But what truly captured his attention was the large, circular emblem embedded in the floor at the center of the room, the presidential seal of the United States. "What the hell?" Marcus whispered, his voice echoing slightly in the hidden chamber. He stepped into the room, his flashlight revealing more details. The walls were lined with built-in shelving, most of which stood empty. A metal desk occupied one corner, its surface bare except for a fine layer of dust. In another corner stood a military-style cot with a neatly folded blanket. The room had the appearance of a bunker or safe room designed for temporary occupation. As Marcus examined the presidential seal more closely, he noticed it wasn't merely painted on the floor. It was inlaid in metal and stone, a permanent fixture executed with remarkable craftsmanship. This was no amateur decoration. It was an official government installation. His examination of the room soon yielded another discovery. Behind the desk, a wall safe was concealed behind a hinged panel. The safe was substantial, not a simple lockbox but a serious security installation, with a combination dial and reinforced door. Without the combination, opening it would require professional equipment that Marcus didn't possess. As he continued to explore, Marcus found a wooden filing cabinet tucked into an alcove. Unlike the safe, the cabinet wasn't locked. Inside, he found several folders containing documents, many bearing government seals and confidential stamps. The dates on the papers ranged from 1962 to 1974. With growing amazement, Marcus began to read. The documents detailed the establishment of what was referred to as Remote Site Willow, an emergency relocation facility for key government personnel. In the event of a nuclear attack on Washington, D.C., the facility had been constructed in 1962 at the height of the Cuban Missile Crisis as part of a network of secure locations across the country. According to the files, Willow Creek Ranch had been chosen for its relative isolation, its proximity to a natural water source, and its position outside the projected impact zones for a nuclear strike on major cities. The government had approached the then-owner, Thomas Donovan, presumably Harold Donovan's father or grandfather, and reached an agreement to construct the facility beneath his property in exchange for significant compensation and the promise of absolute secrecy. The most recent documents indicated that the facility had been decommissioned in 1974, with most equipment removed and the site officially abandoned as newer, more sophisticated facilities came online elsewhere. The property had been returned fully to the Donovan family, with the understanding that the hidden room would remain sealed and its existence undisclosed. Marcus sat on the edge of the desk, trying to process what he had discovered. He had purchased, for a mere $200, a property that had once been a designated presidential emergency facility, a Cold War relic that had somehow remained hidden for decades. As the implications began to sink in, Marcus realized he was now faced with a decision. He could report his discovery to the government, which might lead to the property being reclaimed under national security provisions. He could attempt to keep the discovery secret, using the room for his own purposes. Or he could find a way to leverage this historical find to his advantage, perhaps as a unique selling point if he decided to develop the property. Before he could consider his options further, the sound of a vehicle coming up the driveway pulled him from his thoughts. Quickly gathering the documents he'd been reading, Marcus exited the hidden room, carefully closing the pivoting wall behind him, and hurried upstairs to see who had arrived at his isolated property. Through the grimy front window, he saw a county sheriff's department SUV parked beside his truck. A deputy, tall and weathered with the lean build of someone who spent considerable time outdoors, was already approaching the house. Marcus opened the front door before the deputy could knock. "Can I help you, officer?" "Afternoon," the deputy said, touching the brim of his hat. "Deputy Wade Harmon, County Sheriff's Department, just doing a welfare check. Got a call that someone was out at the old Donovan place." "That would be me," Marcus replied. "Marcus Bennett. I purchased the property at the county auction yesterday." Deputy Harmon's eyebrows rose slightly. "Did you now? Didn't think anyone would take on this old place. Mind if I ask what you're planning to do with it?" "Restore it," Marcus said, the answer coming more easily than he expected. "I was in construction before the recession hit. Figured I could use my skills to bring the place back to life." The deputy nodded, his eyes scanning the dilapidated house and overgrown property. "Quite a project you've taken on, Mr. Bennett. This place has been empty since old Harold passed. 3 years of neglect on top of however many years of Harold's minimal maintenance." "I don't mind hard work," Marcus said, "and please call me Marcus." "Well, Marcus, since you're new to the area, there are a few things you should know," Deputy Harmon said, his tone shifting slightly. "The nearest town is Oak Ridge, about 15 miles east. Small place, but they've got a hardware store, grocery, and medical clinic. Cell service out here is spotty at best, so consider getting a landline installed when you can. And we patrol this area every couple of days, but response times can be slow if there's an emergency." "I appreciate the information," Marcus said. "I've got a lot of work ahead, but I'm looking forward to the challenge." The deputy seemed to hesitate, then added, "One more thing. Harold Donovan was what folks around here call particular about his privacy. Didn't like visitors, kept to himself. Some people in town still tell stories about this place, though most of it's just local superstition." Marcus maintained a neutral expression, thinking of the hidden room in the basement. "What kind of stories?" "Oh, the usual rural legends. Lights seen when the house was supposed to be empty. Vehicles coming and going at odd hours back in the 60s and 70s. Some folks even claimed government men in suits would visit Harold's father Thomas during the Cold War years." Deputy Harmon shrugged. "Probably nothing to any of it. But rumors persist in small communities." "I'll keep that in mind," Marcus said, "though I'm more concerned about fixing the roof than chasing ghost stories." The deputy laughed. "Smart man. Well, I won't keep you from your work. Here's my card with my direct number. Call if you need anything or notice any trouble. Folks are generally friendly around here, but we get the occasional trespasser or vandal at abandoned properties." As Deputy Harmon drove away, Marcus stood on the porch, the business card in his hand and his mind racing. The deputy's casual mention of government men in suits and activity during the Cold War years suggested that local rumors had come closer to the truth than anyone realized. The hidden presidential facility hadn't remained entirely secret after all. Its presence had been sensed, if not confirmed, by the surrounding community. That evening, as the sun set over Willow Creek Ranch, casting long shadows across the overgrown fields, Marcus returned to the hidden room with a camping lantern that provided better illumination than his flashlight. He spread the documents across the metal desk and began a more thorough examination. The files contained detailed specifications for the facility, including its original equipment manifest, security protocols, and communication systems. There were maintenance logs dating from 1962 to 1974, recording regular inspections by government. Personnel disguised as agricultural specialists or distant relatives visiting the Donovan family. Most intriguing were references to a secure storage repository within the facility, designated for materials of highest national importance. The exact nature of these materials wasn't specified, but their significance was emphasized by detailed security procedures for their handling and protection. According to the decommissioning documents, all sensitive materials had been removed when the facility was closed in 1974. However, a handwritten note attached to the final inventory raised questions. Initialed TD, presumably Thomas Donovan, and dated November 1974. It stated simply, "Items as discussed remain secured per our agreement. Location known only to myself and will transfer to H upon my passing." This suggested that something had been left behind, something significant enough to warrant a special arrangement between Thomas Donovan and the government officials overseeing the decommissioning. The wall safe, Marcus realized, might contain whatever items Thomas Donovan had been entrusted to protect. But without the combination, the safe remained inaccessible. He searched the documents for any hint of access codes or combinations, but found nothing obvious. As he continued reading, one document caught his attention, a visitor log recording authorized personnel who had accessed the facility. Most entries contained only initials and dates, but several listed full names, including repeated visits by someone identified as Dr. A. Richardson, Historical Preservation Office. The most recent entry for Dr. Richardson was dated June 1974, just months before the facility was decommissioned. What caught Marcus's attention was a margin note beside this entry. Final consultation re-artifact preservation and documentation. All materials transferred to secure storage per protocol. Echo 7. Marcus sat back, considering this new information. The government had apparently left something significant in the hidden facility, something historical that required special preservation protocols. And based on Thomas Donovan's handwritten note, whatever had been left behind might still be there, likely in the wall safe that Marcus couldn't open. As midnight approached, Marcus reluctantly left the hidden room, carefully securing the pivoting wall behind him. His mind was buzzing with questions and possibilities. He had purchased Willow Creek Ranch hoping for a fresh start, a place to rebuild his life after losing everything. Instead, he had stumbled upon a Cold War secret, a presidential emergency facility that might still contain historically significant artifacts. The discovery presented both opportunity and risk. If he reported it to authorities, he might lose control of the property entirely. If he kept it secret, he could be violating national security regulations. And if he tried to capitalize on the historical significance, he would need to navigate complex legal and political waters. As he settled into his sleeping bag for another night on the dusty floor of what was now his home, Marcus made a decision. Before taking any irreversible steps, he would learn more about the ranch, about the Donovan family, and about the mysterious artifacts that might still be hidden within the secret presidential facility beneath his property. Tomorrow, he would begin his investigation in earnest, starting with a visit to Oak Ridge, the nearby town where someone might remember the Donovans and the strange activities at Willow Creek Ranch during the Cold War years. The construction contractor in him had always believed in gathering all available information before making a plan, and this situation called for nothing less than his most careful consideration. As Marcus drifted toward sleep, he couldn't help but reflect on the strange turn his life had taken. Just days ago, he had been a failed businessman facing homelessness, clinging to the last remnants of his pride. Now he was the owner of a historic property with a presidential secret, a secret that might offer him a path forward that he could never have imagined. The presidential seal embedded in the floor of the hidden room seemed to symbolize both the gravity of his discovery and the weight of responsibility that had unexpectedly fallen upon him. Whatever decisions he made in the coming days would shape not only his own future, but potentially the preservation of a unique piece of American history. With these thoughts swirling in his mind, Marcus finally succumbed to exhaustion, sleeping more soundly than he had in months, cradled in the embrace of a house that had guarded its secrets for decades and was now, perhaps, ready to reveal them to its new owner. The following morning, Marcus woke with first light streaming through the damaged roof. Despite sleeping on the hard floor, he felt more rested than he had in months. There was something invigorating about having a purpose again, even if that purpose was wrapped in mystery. After a quick breakfast of protein bars and bottled water, he decided to make his first trip into Oak Ridge, the nearby town Deputy Harmon had mentioned. Before leaving, Marcus returned to the hidden room in the basement for another look. In the morning light, filtering through the basement's small windows, he noticed details he'd missed the night before. The presidential seal, inlaid with what appeared to be brass and marble, was exquisitely crafted. Running his fingers along its edge, he could feel the precision of the workmanship. This was no hastily constructed facility, but a carefully designed space meant to withstand the unthinkable, a nuclear attack that would decimate the nation's capital. The 15-mile drive to Oak Ridge took Marcus along winding country roads bordered by fields and forests. The town itself was exactly what he'd expected, a small rural community with a main street lined with brick buildings dating back to the early 20th century. A hardware store, grocery, diner, post office, and various small businesses formed the commercial heart of Oak Ridge, while modest homes spread outward from the center. Marcus parked his truck in front of Oak Ridge Hardware and Supply, figuring it would be a good place to start gathering information as well as materials for the most urgent repairs at the ranch. A bell jingled as he pushed open the door, and the familiar smell of cut wood, metal, and various chemicals greeted him. The store was surprisingly well stocked, with narrow aisles packed with tools, building materials, plumbing supplies, and agricultural equipment. "Morning, what can I help you with today?" called a voice from behind the counter. An older man with a neatly trimmed white beard and wire-rimmed glasses looked up from a catalogue he'd been reviewing. "Just looking around," Marcus replied, approaching the counter. "I've recently purchased property in the area and need to assess what supplies I'll need." The man's eyebrows rose slightly. "New to Oak Ridge, then? Frank Mercer, owner of this establishment for 32 years. He extended a weathered hand. "Marcus Bennett," he replied, shaking Frank's hand. "And yes, just arrived yesterday. I bought the Willow Creek Ranch at the county auction." Frank's friendly expression shifted subtly, a flicker of surprise crossing his features. "Donovan's old place? That's been sitting empty since Harold passed. Quite a project you've taken on there." "So I'm discovering," Marcus said with a wry smile. "The roof's my first priority, significant damage in several areas." Frank nodded thoughtfully. "I can help you with materials for that. Got good quality shingles, roofing felt, flashing." He paused, studying Marcus. "You have experience with construction?" "I owned a construction company for 15 years before the recession hit," Marcus explained. "Specialized in commercial renovation, but I've worked on plenty of residential projects too. That'll serve you well at Willow Creek. That place needs a skillful hand." Frank began writing on a notepad. "Let me put together a materials list for the roof repair. While I'm doing that, you might want to head over to Maggie's Diner for some real breakfast. Those protein bars you've been eating won't sustain a man doing heavy labor." Marcus blinked in surprise. "How did you—" Frank chuckled. "Small town. Son, I noticed the empty protein bar wrapper in your truck when you pulled up. Oak Ridge doesn't get many strangers, and when someone buys a property like Willow Creek, word travels fast." This reminder of small-town awareness made Marcus reconsider his approach. If he wanted to learn about the ranch's history without raising suspicions, he would need to be careful with his questions. "Maggie's is just 3 doors down," Frank continued. "Best breakfast in the county. Tell her Frank sent you." Taking the suggestion, Marcus walked to Maggie's Diner, a classic small-town establishment with a chrome-trimmed exterior and large windows. Inside, about half the tables were occupied despite the mid-morning hour. Marcus chose a booth near the back, nodding politely to the other patrons who glanced his way with undisguised curiosity. A middle-aged waitress with auburn hair streaked with grey approached his table, coffee pot in hand. "Morning, stranger. Coffee?" "Please," Marcus replied, accepting the menu she offered. "You must be the fellow who bought the Donovan place," she said matter-of-factly, filling his cup. "I'm Maggie. This is my place." "News travels fast," Marcus observed. "I'm Marcus Bennett." "That's small towns for you," Maggie replied with an easy smile. "We don't get many newcomers, especially ones bold enough to take on Willow Creek. What brings you to our corner of nowhere?" Marcus gave her the simplified version. Former construction business owner looking for a fresh start after the recession, drawn to the affordable property and the challenge of restoration. It wasn't untrue, just incomplete. "Well, you've certainly found yourself a challenge," Maggie said. "Harold Donovan let that place go to seed long before he passed. His father Thomas kept it up better, though he was just as private." This opening was too perfect to ignore. Frank mentioned the Donovans kept to themselves. "Any particular reason why?" Maggie shrugged. "Thomas came back from World War II, a changed man, according to my father. Bought that ranch in the late 40s and became something of a recluse. There were rumors, of course. What kind of rumors? Marcus asked, trying to sound merely curious rather than eager. Oh, the usual small-town speculation. Some folks claimed Thomas was involved in government work of some kind. There were visitors sometimes, official-looking types that didn't fit in around here. Then, during the Cuban Missile Crisis, there was unusual activity out at the ranch. Deliveries at night, vehicles coming and going. She paused. Of course, that was before my time. I'm just repeating stories I've heard. Interesting, Marcus said casually. Any idea what kind of government work Thomas might have been involved in? Military intelligence was the common theory, Maggie replied. He had served in army intelligence. During the war, some folks thought he never really left the service, just continued his work from the ranch. She smiled. Though my grandfather always insisted there was a secret bunker built there during the Cold War, he claimed to have delivered supplies to construction workers in '62. Marcus felt his pulse quicken, but kept his expression neutral. A bunker? Like a fallout shelter. Something like that, Maggie said. Lots of people built shelters during those years. The difference was that Grandad claimed Thomas's shelter was built by government contractors, not local labor. She laughed lightly. But Grandad loved a good story, so take that with a grain of salt. Now what can I get you for breakfast? You'll need proper fuel if you're starting repairs on that place. After ordering what Maggie called the contractors' special, a hearty combination of eggs, bacon, potatoes, and biscuits with gravy, Marcus pondered this new information. The rumors about Willow Creek Ranch had persisted for decades, coming remarkably close to the truth. The locals had sensed something unusual about the property and its owners, even if they hadn't known exactly what was hidden beneath the house. As he ate, Marcus observed the diner's other patrons. Several cast curious glances his way, and he heard the occasional whispered Donovan Place from nearby tables. His presence was clearly the subject of interest, which meant he would need to be careful about his activities at the ranch if he wanted to keep his discovery private for now. After breakfast, Marcus returned to the hardware store, where Frank had prepared a detailed list of materials for the roof repair. I've included everything you'll need, plus a few extras I thought might come in handy, Frank explained. The total comes to just under $1,800. Marcus felt his stomach drop. After the auction payment and the minimal supplies he'd already purchased, he had less than $50 remaining. The roof repairs would have to wait. Frank, observing his expression, leaned forward. I'm also offering you credit. I appreciate that, but I'm not sure when I'd be able to pay it back, Marcus admitted. My financial situation is complicated at the moment. Let's call it an investment in Willow Creek's restoration, Frank said. This town needs new blood, and that property has been neglected too long. Pay me back when you can, with reasonable interest. We can draw up the terms now, if you'd like. Marcus was stunned by the offer. Why would you take that risk on someone you just met? Frank's eyes crinkled at the corners. I'm a decent judge of character, and I know what it's like to start over with nothing but determination. Did that myself when I bought this store back in '91 after losing my factory job. Sometimes all a person needs is one person willing to take a chance on them. The unexpected kindness nearly broke through the emotional walls Marcus had built since his business collapsed. With an effort, he maintained his composure. I don't know what to say. Say you'll fix that roof before the next big rain, Frank replied practically, and that you'll consider joining us for community dinner at the town hall this Sunday. Good way to meet folks. By midday, Marcus's truck was loaded with roofing materials, basic plumbing supplies, and essential tools he hadn't found in the ranch's storage shed. Frank had drawn up a simple but fair credit agreement, and Marcus had promised to attend Sunday's community dinner. As he drove back to Willow Creek Ranch, Marcus reflected on the stark contrast between the impersonal city he'd left behind and the surprising warmth of this rural community. He'd expected isolation, but instead found immediate connections and unexpected support. Upon returning to the ranch, Marcus unloaded the supplies and immediately began assessing the roof damage more thoroughly. The most critical section was above, the master bedroom, where several missing shingles had allowed water to penetrate the underlying structure. He set up a ladder and climbed carefully onto the sloped surface, noting areas where the wooden decking beneath the shingles had begun to rot. As he worked, Marcus's mind kept returning to the hidden room and its mysteries. The presidential seal, the wall safe, the mention of artifacts in the documents, all pointed to something of significant historical importance. What could have been left behind when the facility was decommissioned? And why would the government entrust whatever it was to a private citizen like Thomas Donovan? By sunset, Marcus had removed the damaged sections of roofing and temporarily covered the exposed areas with tarps to prevent further water intrusion. Tomorrow he would begin installing new decking and shingles, but for now his thoughts turned again to the basement and its secret. After a simple dinner of canned soup heated on a camping stove, Marcus returned to the hidden room with a more powerful battery-operated lamp he'd purchased in town. The improved lighting revealed subtle details he'd missed before: a ventilation system built into the ceiling, electrical conduits running along the base of the walls, and what appeared to be the remnants of a communication station in one corner. Marcus returned to the filing cabinet, methodically examining each document for any clue to the safe's combination or the nature of the artifacts mentioned in the records. One folder contained photographs of the facility during its construction and initial operation. The images showed a much more extensive installation than what remained: communication equipment, sleeping quarters for multiple personnel, food and water storage, and a medical area. One photo in particular caught Marcus's attention. It showed Thomas Donovan standing beside a man in a suit, both looking at what appeared to be a display case containing something Marcus couldn't quite make out. The back of the photo bore a date, October 1962, and an inscription, T.D. and Dr. Richardson with the Lincoln artifacts, secure storage preparation. Lincoln artifacts. Marcus's curiosity intensified. Could the safe contain items connected to Abraham Lincoln? If so, they would be of immense historical value, possibly explaining the elaborate security measures and the presence of the presidential seal. Continuing his search, Marcus found a thin file marked Repository Inventory that he had overlooked during his previous examinations. Inside was a single typed page listing several items: original handwritten draft, Gettysburg Address, partial personal pocket watch ALA, recovered from April 14, 1865, leather portfolio with presidential seal containing classified communications, war strategy, blood-stained cufflink, present at Ford's Theatre Journal page, Mrs. Lincoln, regarding premonitions, classified under National Security Directive 17B. Marcus stared at the inventory in disbelief. If genuine, these artifacts related to Abraham Lincoln and his assassination would be priceless historical treasures. and explaining both the presidential seal in the floor and the high security surrounding the facility. The question remained, why would such valuable historical items be stored in a secret bunker on a remote ranch, rather than in the Smithsonian or National Archives? The answer might lie in the reference to classified communications and the National Security Directive, mentioned in relation to Mary Lincoln's journal page. Perhaps these items contained information the government had deemed too sensitive for public knowledge, even a century after Lincoln's death. As Marcus pondered this possibility, he noticed something unusual about the inventory page. Holding it up to the light, he could see faint impressions in the paper, numbers that had been written on another page resting atop this one, pressing through with enough force to leave an impression, angling the lamp to create stronger shadows across the page. Marcus could make out what appeared to be a sequence, 1865, 15-9. Could this be the safe combination? The first four digits, 1865, corresponded to the year of Lincoln's assassination. It seemed too coincidental to ignore. With mounting excitement, Marcus approached the wall safe and carefully turned the dial. Right to 18, left to 65, right to 15, left to 09. He held his breath as he tried the handle. Nothing happened. Disappointed but not deterred, Marcus tried again, this time with a different interpretation of the standard combination lock sequence. Right to 18, left past 18 to 65, right past 65 to 15, left past 15 to 09. This time he felt a subtle click as he turned the handle, and the safe door swung open. Inside was a single item, a flat, rectangular box, made of aged but well-preserved walnut, its surface polished to a soft glow. With trembling hands, Marcus carefully removed the box and placed it on the metal desk. The box was secured with a simple brass clasp, unadorned except for a small presidential seal inlaid in the lid, a miniature version of the large emblem in the floor. When Marcus released the clasp and opened the lid, he found himself staring at a folded document nestled in dark blue velvet. The paper was yellowed with age, its edges slightly frayed, but otherwise in remarkable condition. What struck Marcus immediately was the handwriting, flowing and distinctive, covering about half a page of what had once been a larger document. At the top, in a different hand, someone had written, "Original draft fragment, Gettysburg Address in Lincoln's hand. Recovered from assassin's effects, classified." Marcus could hardly breathe. If authentic, he was looking at a piece of American history worth millions. A fragment of the Gettysburg Address, written by Abraham Lincoln himself, with a mysterious connection to his assassination that had apparently warranted classification for national security reasons. But there was something else in the box, an envelope tucked beneath the velvet lining. Marcus carefully lifted the document and velvet to reveal a modern-looking envelope addressed simply to the current owner of Willow Creek Ranch. Inside was a letter dated 1996, written in a shaky but legible hand. "To whoever finds this room and its contents, my name is Harold Donovan. My father, Thomas Donovan, was entrusted with the safekeeping of a significant historical artifact by the United States government in 1962. The circumstances were extraordinary. The nation faced possible nuclear annihilation during the Cuban Missile Crisis, and contingency plans were made to preserve key historical items and essential government functions. This presidential emergency facility was one of several constructed across the country, but unique in its additional role as A secure repository for what my father was told was a historically significant item with national security implications. The document in your possession is authentic, a draft fragment of the Gettysburg Address in Abraham Lincoln's own hand. What makes it unique, and the reason for its classified status, is its provenance. This particular fragment was found among the personal effects of John Wilkes Booth after his death. On the reverse side, barely visible unless you know to look for it, are notes believed to be written by Booth himself, outlining aspects of a larger conspiracy that the government of 1865 chose to suppress. My father was a decorated military intelligence officer who served with distinction in World War II and continued government service afterward. His discretion and remote property made him the ideal custodian for this sensitive artifact when the facility was decommissioned in 1974. Before his death in 1982, my father entrusted me with this responsibility and the knowledge of what truly happened after Lincoln's assassination, knowledge that remains classified to this day. I have honored that trust throughout my life. Now, as I face my own mortality, with no heirs to continue this duty, I leave the decision about this artifact's future to whoever shows the initiative and curiosity to discover this room and unlock its secrets. History belongs to those who seek it, and truth to those bold enough to face it. Whatever you decide, know that you now share in a historical trust that spans generations. Harold Donovan. Marcus sat back, the letter in his hands, trying to absorb the implications of what he'd discovered. The fragment of the Gettysburg Address was extraordinary enough, but the suggestion of suppressed information about Lincoln's assassination, possibly evidence of a broader conspiracy than history acknowledged, was overwhelming. He carefully refolded the document and returned it to its velvet nest, closing the walnut box with a sense of reverence. This wasn't just a valuable historical artifact. It was a piece of hidden history that raised profound questions about how the past is preserved, presented, and sometimes concealed. As he secured the box and returned it to the safe, Marcus realized that his purchase of Willow Creek Ranch had given him more than just property and shelter. It had made him the inheritor of a historical trust and a mystery that had remained hidden for decades. The questions now facing him were momentous. What should he do with his discovery? Return it to the government, contact historical authorities, seek verification of its authenticity? Each path carried significant implications, not just for the artifact, but potentially for the accepted narrative of an iconic moment in American history. As Marcus left the hidden room, carefully securing the pivoting wall behind him, he felt a weight of responsibility he had never experienced, not even when his construction company had employed 30 people who depended on him for their livelihoods. This was different. This was history itself, entrusted to his judgment and care. That night, as he lay in his sleeping bag, listening to the sounds of the old house settling around him, Marcus reflected on how dramatically his life had changed. In just a few days, from a failed businessman with less than $1,300 to his name, he had become the custodian of a presidential emergency facility and a historical artifact of immeasurable significance. The irony wasn't lost on him. He had come to Willow Creek Ranch seeking only shelter and a chance to rebuild his life. Instead, he had found a purpose and responsibility far greater than anything he could have imagined, one that connected him to historical events and decisions made decades before his birth. Tomorrow, he would continue the practical work of repairing the roof and making the house habitable. But now these tasks seemed different, not just personal necessity, but part of preserving a property with unique historical significance. As he drifted toward sleep, Marcus realized that his desperate purchase of an abandoned ranch hadn't just given him a place to live. It had given him a mission, a connection to the past, and perhaps most importantly, a future with meaning beyond mere survival. Dawn broke over Willow Creek Ranch with golden light filtering through the patched sections of roof. Marcus had slept fitfully, his mind churning with the magnitude of his discovery. The fragment of the Gettysburg Address, the hidden presidential facility, the conspiracy implications, all of it seemed almost too fantastic to believe. Yet the documents, the presidential seal, and Harold Donovan's letter were undeniably real. As he prepared a modest breakfast on his camping stove, Marcus mapped out his priorities for the day. The practical concerns of making the ranch habitable couldn't be neglected, regardless of what historical treasures lay beneath the floorboards. He would dedicate the morning to continuing the roof repairs, then use the afternoon to research the historical context of his discovery without drawing unwanted attention. By 7 a.m., Marcus was already on the roof, replacing damaged decking and laying new felt paper over the repaired sections. The physical labor helped clear his mind, the familiar rhythms of construction work grounding him amid the surreal circumstances. There was something deeply satisfying about the tangible progress. Each nail driven, each shingle placed, was a visible step toward reclaiming the neglected property. As he worked, Marcus found himself reflecting on the strange symmetry of his situation. He had lost everything when his construction business failed, yet those same skills were now essential to preserving both his new home and its remarkable historical secret. The craftsmanship that had once built his company would now rebuild his life, albeit in ways he never could have anticipated. Around midday, as Marcus was finishing the most critical section of the roof, he heard a vehicle approaching along the gravel driveway. Setting down his hammer, he climbed down the ladder to meet his visitor. To his surprise, it was Maggie from the diner, driving an old but well-maintained pickup truck loaded with what appeared to be supplies. "Thought you might need some proper provisions," she called, as she stepped from the truck. "Living on protein bars and canned soup isn't sustainable when you're doing heavy work." Marcus approached, genuinely touched by the gesture. "How did you know about the soup?" Maggie laughed. "I saw the cans in your trash when you dumped it behind the diner yesterday. Small town, remember? Nothing escapes notice." She began unloading containers from the truck. "I've brought some real food, roast chicken, potato salad, bread I baked this morning, and a few other essentials. Consider it a welcome wagon." "I don't know what to say," Marcus replied, helping her carry the containers. "Thank you isn't adequate." "Then don't say anything," Maggie responded with a warm smile. "Just eat properly and get this place back in shape. The community has been waiting for someone to love this old ranch again." As they set the food inside the house, Maggie glanced around with undisguised curiosity. "You've started making progress already, I see." "Fixing the roof first was smart. Had to stop the water damage before anything else," Marcus said. "Once that's done, I'll focus on the utilities. Plumbing and electrical systems need complete overhauls." Maggie nodded approvingly. "You really do know what you're doing. That's refreshing. Too many city folks buy country properties with romantic notions and no practical skills." She hesitated, then added, "You know, there's a story about this house." Marcus kept his expression neutral. Frank and Deputy Harmon mentioned there were local legends. "More than legends," Maggie said, lowering her voice slightly. "My grandfather worked on this property back in 1962. He was sworn to secrecy, but he told my father, who eventually told me. There's a government facility beneath this house, a Cold War bunker built during the Cuban Missile Crisis." Marcus felt his pulse quicken. "That sounds far-fetched," he said carefully. "That's what most people think," Maggie agreed. "But Grandpa wasn't one for tall tales. He was a concrete specialist. Said they brought him in for a special pour, largest, most reinforced residential foundation he'd ever worked on. Had to sign federal non-disclosure agreements." "Interesting," Marcus said, trying to sound merely curious. "Any idea why they would build something like that here?" "Location, primarily. Far enough from major cities to survive nuclear strikes, but accessible by certain roads that were designated emergency routes. Plus, Thomas Donovan had government connections from his military service." Maggie shrugged. "At least, that's what Grandpa believed." Marcus considered how to respond. Maggie clearly knew more about the ranch's history than most locals, and her grandfather had first-hand knowledge of the facility's construction. She might be a valuable ally, or a complication, if she shared this information widely. "Do many people in town know these stories?" he asked. "They've become distorted over time," Maggie replied. "Most folks think they're just rural legends. A few of the older generation might suspect there's some truth to them, but no one has evidence." She fixed him with a direct gaze. "Except possibly you, now that you own the place." The moment hung between them, charged with unspoken questions. Marcus made a decision, based more on instinct than careful calculation. "Would you like some coffee?" he asked. "I think we have a lot to talk about." Over the next hour, Marcus shared a carefully edited version of his discovery with Maggie. He mentioned finding a hidden room with a presidential seal and government documents about a Cold War emergency facility, but omitted any reference to the Gettysburg Address fragment or its connection to Lincoln's assassination. That secret felt too momentous, too potentially dangerous to share yet, even with someone as seemingly trustworthy as Maggie. For her part, Maggie filled in historical details about the Donovan family and Willow Creek Ranch that weren't contained in the documents. Marcus had found Thomas Donovan had indeed been a decorated military intelligence officer who served with distinction in World War II. After the war, he had occasionally disappeared on what he called consulting trips to Washington, D.C., maintaining connections with government officials throughout the 1950s. When the facility was built, there was unusual activity around the ranch for months, Maggie explained. Trucks arriving at night, workers who weren't from the area, men in suits making brief visits. Then it all stopped, and the Donovans became even more private than before. The documents indicate the facility was decommissioned in 1974, Marcus said. Did locals notice anything then? Maggie considered this. Not that I've heard. By then, Thomas was elderly, and Harold had taken over managing the property. Harold was even more reclusive than his father, barely came into town, except for absolute necessities. "Why are you telling me all this?" Marcus asked finally. "Most people would keep family stories like these private, especially from a newcomer." Maggie's expression grew serious. because history matters, because secrets like these shouldn't die with the people who kept them, and because you're the first person to show genuine interest in this property in decades." She paused. "Also, frankly, because I'm curious. I've wondered about the truth behind these stories my entire life." Marcus nodded, understanding her motivation. "I appreciate your candor, and I'll tell you what I find, within reason. Some of this might have security implications I need to consider carefully." "Fair enough," Maggie agreed. "In the meantime, eat some real food and continue your repairs. The historical mysteries will wait." After Maggie left, Marcus returned to his roof work with renewed energy, fueled by both proper nutrition and the stimulation of sharing part of his discovery with someone who understood its significance. By late afternoon, he had completed the most critical repairs, ensuring the house was protected from immediate weather damage. As evening approached, Marcus showered using the garden hose he had managed to connect to the property's well, the cold water invigorating after a day of physical labor. Then, feeling more presentable than he had in days, he drove back to Oak Ridge with a specific destination in mind: the town library. The Oak Ridge Public Library occupied a modest brick building on a side street off the main thoroughfare. Despite its small size, Marcus hoped it might contain local historical records that could provide context for his discovery. At minimum, he wanted to learn more about the Lincoln assassination and any historical debates about broader conspiracies surrounding it. The library was quiet, with only an elderly librarian arranging books near the front desk. She looked up as Marcus entered, offering a friendly smile. "Good evening. I don't believe we've met. I'm Eleanor Whitman, head librarian." "Marcus Bennett," he replied, shaking her offered hand. "I recently purchased Willow Creek Ranch." Recognition flickered in her eyes. "Ah, the Donovan place. That's certainly noteworthy. What brings you to our little library?" "Research," Marcus explained. "I'm interested in learning about the property's history and American history more broadly, particularly the Civil War era." Eleanor's expression brightened. "A history enthusiast. How refreshing. Our local history section is small but comprehensive for this region. The Civil War materials are in the American history section, naturally. Is there something specific you're looking for?" "Information about Abraham Lincoln, particularly his assassination and its aftermath," Marcus said, trying to sound like a casual history buff, rather than someone who might possess a classified historical artifact. "An endlessly fascinating subject," Eleanor remarked, leading him toward the relevant shelves. "The official narrative says Booth acted largely alone, but various conspiracy theories have persisted. Some better supported than others, of course." For the next 2 hours, Marcus immersed himself in books about Lincoln, the Gettysburg Address, and the assassination conspiracy. He learned that multiple versions of the Gettysburg Address existed, written in Lincoln's hand at different times. The knowledge that various authentic drafts were preserved in museums and archives made the fragment hidden at Willow Creek seem both more credible and more mysterious. Why would this particular version require classification and secret storage? As closing time approached, Marcus relocated to the local history section, seeking information about Willow Creek Ranch and the Donovan family. A slim volume titled Oak Ridge County, A Pictorial History, yielded several relevant pages, including a photograph of Thomas Donovan receiving a military commendation in 1946, and another showing Willow Creek Ranch circa 1955, looking pristine and well-maintained, a stark contrast to its current state. "Finding what you need?" Eleanor asked as she prepared to close the library. "Yes, though I could spend days here," Marcus replied honestly. "Is there anything specifically about the Donovans or Willow Creek Ranch that isn't on these shelves?" Eleanor considered his question. "Not in our public collection, but—" She hesitated. "There is a local history archive in the basement, with more specialized materials. Newspaper clippings, personal accounts, that sort of thing. Normally, it's only accessible to researchers with appointments, but I could make an exception tomorrow if you're interested." Marcus accepted her offer gratefully, arranging to return the following afternoon. As he drove back to the ranch under a canopy of stars, he felt a growing sense of purpose. Each conversation, each discovery was filling in pieces of a historical puzzle that somehow, improbably, had fallen into his hands. Back at the ranch, Marcus ate some of Maggie's homemade bread with roast chicken, savoring real food after days of makeshift meals. Then, unable to resist the pull of the hidden room, he descended to the basement, activated the pivoting wall, and returned to his exploration. This time, he focused on the documents he had only skimmed previously: maintenance logs, security, protocols, and communication records. The facility had been regularly inspected from 1962 to 1974, with government personnel arriving under various covers: agricultural specialists, distant relatives, insurance assessors, to check the systems and ensure everything remained operational. One name appeared consistently in these logs: Dr. Alexander Richardson, the same historical preservation specialist mentioned in connection with the artifacts. According to the records, Richardson had made quarterly visits for the first 5 years, then annual visits thereafter until the decommissioning. Most intriguing was a communication transcript from October 1962, the height of the Cuban Missile Crisis, indicating that the facility had been briefly activated and staffed with a small contingent of personnel for 3 days. The document didn't specify who these individuals were, only that they included Package Designate Alpha and support staff. As Marcus continued reading, the historical significance of what had occurred beneath Willow Creek Ranch became increasingly clear. This hadn't been merely a theoretical emergency facility, but one that had actually been used during one of the most dangerous moments in American history, potentially housing someone of considerable importance during the nuclear standoff with the Soviet Union. After returning the documents to their folders, Marcus turned his attention once more to the walnut box in the safe. Carefully removing it, he opened the lid and looked again at the fragment of the Gettysburg Address. The yellowed paper with Lincoln's distinctive handwriting seemed to radiate historical significance. Following Harold Donovan's letter's instruction, Marcus gently turned the document over. There, in faded ink and a different hand, were handwritten notes that had been deliberately preserved along with Lincoln's text. Final phase proceeds as planned. T confirms war debt, involvement. Union must be purified through fire. April 14th will mark the beginning, not the end. The words sent a chill through Marcus. If authentic, these cryptic notes suggested John Wilkes Booth had been part of a broader conspiracy that included someone within the War Department itself, a far more extensive plot than most historical accounts acknowledged. Suddenly, the government's decision to classify and secure this document made profound sense. Evidence of high-level involvement in Lincoln's assassination would be explosive even a century later, potentially forcing a re-evaluation of a pivotal moment in American history. Marcus carefully returned the document to its box, and the box to the safe, securing everything as he found it. The weight of responsibility he felt had grown exponentially. This wasn't merely a valuable historical artifact. It was evidence that might challenge the accepted narrative of a defining national tragedy. As he climbed the stairs back to the main floor, Marcus confronted the questions that had been building since his discovery. What was his obligation here? To history? To the government that had classified this information? To the Donovans, who had guarded it for generations? To himself and his own future? The complexity of these questions followed him into fitful sleep, his dreams filled with presidential seals, hidden documents, and the faces of people he had never met, but whose decisions, decades ago, had created the mystery he now inhabited. Morning arrived with no clear answers, but a strengthened resolve to proceed methodically. After breakfast, Marcus returned to the practical work of restoration, focusing on the plumbing system. The ranch's well was still functional but required cleaning and a new pump. The pipes throughout the house needed inspection and partial replacement. As he worked beneath the kitchen sink, replacing corroded supply lines, Marcus heard the now familiar sound of a vehicle approaching. Setting down his wrench, he went to the front door, expecting Maggie or perhaps Deputy Harmon making another check. Instead, a sleek black SUV with government plates was coming up the driveway, raising a cloud of dust in its wake. Marcus felt his stomach tighten. Had his research at the library somehow alerted someone? Had Maggie shared more than she indicated, or was this merely a coincidence? The SUV parked beside his truck, and two men in dark suits emerged. They were the quintessential government agents of popular imagination, clean-cut, expressionless, moving with efficient purpose. "Mr. Bennett," the older of the two called as they approached. "I'm Special Agent Harris, and this is Special Agent Chen. We're with the Department of Historical Preservation and Security. We'd like to speak with you about this property." Marcus had never heard of such a department, but the formal identification cards they presented appeared authentic. "What can I help you with?" he asked, keeping his tone neutral despite his racing heart. "We're conducting a routine assessment of historically significant properties in this region," Agent Harris explained. "Willow Creek Ranch has certain historical designations in our records that require periodic evaluation, especially when ownership changes." It was a plausible explanation that Marcus didn't believe for a second. The timing was too convenient, the appearance too precisely aligned with his discovery. These men knew about the hidden facility, or at least suspected its existence. "I wasn't aware of any historical designations," Marcus said carefully. "The property was sold at auction with no mention of such status." Agent Chen smiled thinly. "These designations aren't always included in public records. May we come inside? We have some specific documentation needs." Marcus stood aside to let them enter, his mind racing through possible scenarios. Should he maintain complete ignorance? Admit to finding the hidden room but not the Gettysburg fragment? Reveal everything and face whatever consequences followed? The agents moved through the house with practiced efficiency, noting the repair work underway and the general condition of the property. Their questions seemed innocuous enough. How long had Marcus owned the ranch? What were his renovation plans? Had he encountered any unusual structural features? Just standard construction for this region and era, Marcus replied to the last question, watching their reactions carefully. Though there are some interesting design choices, the stone foundation is unusually substantial for a property this age. Agent Harris's eyes flickered briefly. Rural properties often have overbuilt foundations to withstand seasonal ground shifts. Have you explored the basement thoroughly? The directness of the question confirmed Marcus's suspicion that they knew exactly what might be found beneath the house. This was no routine historical assessment. I've been focused on the roof and plumbing systems, Marcus answered truthfully. The basement needs clearing out before I can properly evaluate it. Agent Chen made a note on his tablet. We'd like to schedule a more comprehensive assessment, including ground-penetrating radar surveys of the property, standard procedure for properties with potential historical significance. I'd need to see some official documentation about these historical designations before agreeing to that, Marcus said, forcing confidence into his voice. And frankly, I'd like to know exactly what you're looking for. The agents exchanged a glance that contained volumes of unspoken communication. Finally, Agent Harris adopted a more candid tone. Mr. Bennett, this property has certain national security implications that I'm not at liberty to fully disclose. I can tell you that during the Cold War, various facilities were established throughout the country as part of continuity of government protocols. Most have been decommissioned and repurposed, but we maintain oversight to ensure no sensitive materials or structures are compromised. It was a partial truth, enough to explain their presence without revealing knowledge of the Gettysburg fragment or its significance. I appreciate your honesty, Marcus replied, but if there's something specific about this property I should know as its owner, I'd prefer full disclosure. That might be possible, Agent Harris said, with the appropriate security clearance protocols. In the meantime, we'd appreciate your cooperation with the survey team we'll send next week. Marcus neither agreed nor refused, maintaining a position of polite uncertainty that left his options open. After another 15 minutes of conversation and a cursory tour of the accessible areas of the house, the agents departed, leaving Marcus with their business cards and a profound unease about what might happen next. As their SUV disappeared down the driveway, Marcus realized he had reached a critical decision point. The government, or some faction within it, was aware of Willow Creek Ranch's significance and was actively monitoring it. His window for independent action was closing rapidly. With renewed urgency, Marcus returned to the hidden room, gathering the most critical documents and photographing others with his phone. He needed to understand exactly what he possessed and its historical context before the survey team arrived, and potentially discovered that he had already found the secret facility. As he carefully sorted through the materials, Marcus found himself reflecting on the strange journey that had brought him to this moment. His construction business failure, which had once seemed like the end of his life's work, had instead led him to a role he could never have imagined, custodian of a historical secret with potential national implications. There was a profound irony in how his professional expertise, the very skills that had failed to save his business, were now essential to both restoring the ranch and understanding the hidden facility beneath it. The detailed knowledge of structural systems, materials, and construction techniques that he had developed over decades allowed him to appreciate the sophistication of the secret installation and recognize its historical significance. For the first time since his business collapsed, Marcus felt a sense of purpose that transcended mere survival. This unexpected discovery had given him something his professional success never had: a connection to history and a responsibility that extended beyond his personal concerns. As evening approached, Marcus secured the hidden room and prepared to return to Oakridge. The library's local history archives might contain information about Thomas Donovan's government connections or unusual activities at the ranch during the Cold War years. More importantly, Eleanor the librarian struck him as someone who might have insights beyond what was documented in the official records. Whatever came next, whether government intervention, historical revelation, or some middle path he hadn't yet envisioned, Marcus was determined to approach it with the same care and integrity he had once brought to his construction projects. The ranch and its secrets deserved nothing less. As he drove toward town, Marcus glanced in his rearview mirror at Willow Creek Ranch, its weathered silhouette backlit by the setting sun. What had begun as a desperate last chance purchased with his remaining $1,200 had become something far more significant: a historical trust, a national security matter, and perhaps most unexpectedly, a new beginning built on the very skills he had thought had failed him. The road ahead was uncertain, filled with questions about historical truth, government secrecy, and his own responsibility to both. But for the first time in months, Marcus faced that uncertainty with something approaching optimism. He had found not just a property but a purpose, one that might ultimately prove more rewarding than any commercial success he had ever achieved. The Oakridge Public Library stood silent and dignified in the fading evening light as Marcus parked his truck. Along the curb, only a few lights remained on inside, one illuminating Eleanor Whitman as she organized materials at the circulation desk. She looked up as Marcus entered, offering a warm smile of recognition. "Right on time, Mr. Bennett. I've pulled the archive. Materials I mentioned yesterday," she said, gesturing toward a door marked "Staff Only" behind her desk. "We'll have privacy in the research room." Marcus followed Eleanor through the door and down a short hallway to a small room with a large table, several chairs, and walls lined with filing cabinets and archival boxes. On the table sat several folders, a bound collection of newspaper clippings, and what appeared to be a personal journal. "These are all the materials related to Willow Creek Ranch and the Donovan family in our local archives," Eleanor explained. "Some are public records, others personal accounts donated by community members. The journal belonged to my father, Walter Whitman, who was the county surveyor from 1955 to 1978. Marcus glanced at Eleanor with newfound interest. "Your father was the surveyor during the period when the changes were made to the property?" Eleanor's eyes sparkled with intelligence. "You've found it, haven't you? The underground facility." The directness of her question startled Marcus. "What makes you think there's anything to find?" "My father helped survey the original construction," she replied calmly. "He couldn't discuss it officially, signed all sorts of government confidentiality agreements, but he kept personal notes, and he told me stories, particularly after he retired." She tapped the journal. "It's all in here, though he wrote in a simple substitution cipher for the sensitive parts. I transcribed it years ago." Marcus considered his options. Eleanor clearly knew more than most locals about Willow Creek's secrets, and her father had first-hand knowledge of the facility's construction. She could be an invaluable resource, or a serious complication, depending on her intentions. "I had visitors today," Marcus said carefully. "Government agents asking about historical designations and requesting permission to conduct surveys." Eleanor nodded, unsurprised. "They monitor property transfers in certain locations. My father said they would occasionally check in on Thomas Donovan very discreetly. After Thomas died, they spoke with Harold once or twice, then seemed to lose interest." She eyed him curiously. "They must suspect you found something specific." Marcus made a decision, based on instinct and the strange bond of shared secrecy. "I found more than just the facility. There's a historical artifact, a fragment of the Gettysburg Address, with notes on the back that suggest a broader conspiracy in Lincoln's assassination, potentially involving the War Department." Eleanor's eyes widened. "My God," she whispered, "that explains—" She trailed off, then reached for her father's journal, flipping to a specific page. Dad wrote about overhearing something during the construction. The project engineers mentioned securing the L documents in a specialized vault. He assumed L was for classified or limited access, but Lincoln makes much more sense. For the next 2 hours, Marcus and Eleanor pored over Walter Whitman's journal entries about Willow Creek Ranch, newspaper articles documenting unusual activity periods, and county records showing property alterations that had no corresponding building permits. Together, they assembled a clearer picture of what had occurred. The facility had indeed been constructed as part of the government's continuity plans during the Cuban Missile Crisis, but Willow Creek had been selected for dual purposes, both as a potential evacuation site and as a secure repository for historically sensitive materials that needed protection from potential nuclear attacks on Washington, D.C. "What's truly fascinating," Eleanor noted, showing Marcus a coded entry from her father's journal, "is that the facility was briefly activated in October 1962. Dad wrote that he observed what appeared to be a presidential motorcade, though without formal markings, heading toward Willow Creek at night. The next morning, military vehicles established checkpoints on all roads within 5 miles of the property. The documents I found mentioned package designate Alpha being on site during that period," Marcus added. "Could President Kennedy himself have been evacuated to Willow Creek during the height of the missile crisis?" Eleanor considered this. "It's possible. Dad never claimed to have seen the president, but he noted unusual air activity and communication arrays being temporarily installed. Something extraordinary happened there during those 3 days." As they continued their research, a more complete history emerged. Thomas Donovan had indeed been a military intelligence officer whose specific expertise involved document authentication and preservation. After World War II, he had worked for a classified division of the National Archives before retiring to Willow Creek Ranch in the late 1940s. According to these records, Eleanor said, pointing to a faded letter, Thomas didn't actually purchase the ranch. It was granted to him by the government as part of his retirement arrangement, though publicly it appeared to be a normal property transaction. A convenient arrangement if they later wanted to build a secret facility there, Marcus observed. Precisely, and look at this. Eleanor handed him a newspaper clipping from 1974, showing Thomas Donovan receiving a civilian service medal from a Defense Department official. The accompanying article mentioned his continued contributions to national historical preservation efforts, though no specifics were provided. This would have been around when the facility was officially decommissioned, Marcus noted, a recognition for his role as custodian of whatever was left behind. Eleanor nodded. Dad believed Thomas was entrusted with something significant, though he never knew what. He just knew it was important enough that government representatives continued to visit occasionally, very discreetly, until Thomas died. As closing time approached, Marcus helped Eleanor return the materials to their archival boxes. "What will you do now?" she asked quietly. "The agents will return, and they'll want access to whatever you've found." It was the question Marcus had been wrestling with since discovering the hidden room and its contents. What was his responsibility here? To history, to the government, to himself? "I'm not sure yet," he admitted. "Part of me feels this historical document belongs in the National Archives or a museum where scholars can study it properly. But I'm concerned about the classification issues. If it reveals information the government still considers sensitive, they might simply lock it away again." Eleanor considered his dilemma. History belongs to everyone, not just those with security clearances, but there are competing interests to consider. National security, historical accuracy, the integrity of the artifact itself. She paused. "Whatever you decide, I'd like to help if I can." Marcus thanked her sincerely. As they parted outside the library, Eleanor handed him a flash drive. "The digital copies of everything we reviewed tonight, plus my father's deciphered journal entries, just in case you need them." Driving back to Willow Creek Ranch under a canopy of stars, Marcus felt a curious mix of tension and elation. The stakes of his discovery had grown exponentially, not just a presidential emergency facility, but potentially a site where President Kennedy himself had taken shelter during one of history's most dangerous moments, and a repository for evidence that might rewrite the accepted narrative of Lincoln's assassination. When he arrived at the ranch, Marcus immediately noticed something was wrong. The front door stood slightly ajar, though he was certain he had locked it before leaving. Approaching cautiously, he peered through the window and saw flashlight beams moving inside the house. Someone was searching Willow Creek Ranch. Rather than confront the intruders directly, Marcus retreated to his truck and called Deputy Harmon, explaining that he believed burglars had broken into his property. While waiting for the deputy to arrive, he considered the implications. Were these common thieves who happened upon an apparently abandoned property? Or had the government agents returned unofficially to search for what they suspected might be hidden at Willow Creek? 20 minutes later, Deputy Harmon's patrol vehicle came up the driveway, lights flashing but siren silent. Before the deputy could exit his vehicle, two figures darted from the house and disappeared into the darkness behind the barn. "Stay here," Harmon ordered as he pursued the intruders, flashlight in one hand and weapon drawn in the other. Marcus waited anxiously, listening to the sounds of pursuit fading into the distance. After what seemed an eternity, Harmon returned alone, breathing heavily. "Lost them in the woods," he explained, holstering his weapon. "Looks like they had a vehicle waiting on the old logging road behind your property. You'll need to check if anything was taken." Together, they entered the house and surveyed the damage. The intruders had been methodical, searching through drawers and closets, moving furniture to check beneath and behind it. But their focus had clearly been the basement. Tools and storage items had been scattered across the floor, and sections of the stone walls showed scrape marks where they had been examining the stonework. They were looking for something specific, Harmon observed, kneeling to examine fresh marks on the basement floor. Any idea what? Marcus maintained his composure, deciding that partial honesty was the safest approach. I had some government agents visit earlier today. They mentioned historical designations and wanted to conduct surveys of the property. They seemed particularly interested in the basement. Harmon's expression sharpened. What kind of government? Agents? Department of Historical Preservation and Security, Marcus replied, showing Harmon the business card they had left. The deputy examined the card with a skeptical eye. Never heard of that department. Did they show credentials? They did, but I'm no expert on government ID. Harmon handed the card back. I'll make some calls, verify they're legitimate. In the meantime, these marks suggest your intruders were searching for something in the walls or floor. Any idea what might be hidden here? Again, Marcus opted for partial truth. Eleanor Whitman at the library mentioned that local legends suggest there might be some kind of Cold War installation on the property, a fallout shelter or communications facility. I haven't found anything like that, but maybe that's what they were looking for. Harmon studied Marcus thoughtfully. The old rumors about Willow Creek. Most folks dismiss them as rural legends, but they've persisted for decades. He holstered his flashlight. I'll increase patrols in this area for the next few days. And I suggest you consider a security system, even a basic one. This property is too isolated to rely on neighbors noticing suspicious activity. After Harmon departed, Marcus returned to the basement to examine the pivoting wall that concealed the hidden room. To his relief, it appeared untouched. The intruders had searched extensively, but had not discovered the entrance mechanism. His discovery remained secure, at least for now. Back upstairs, Marcus considered his next move. The break-in confirmed his suspicions that others were actively seeking what he had found. Whether the intruders were connected to the government, agents, or represented some other interest was unclear, but the urgency of making a decision about the Gettysburg fragment had increased significantly. After securing the house as best he could, Marcus spent a restless night considering his options. By morning, he had formulated a plan that balanced his various responsibilities to history, to his own future, and to the trust that had been placed in him as the current owner of Willow Creek Ranch. The first step was documentation. Using his phone, Marcus carefully photographed every page of every document in the hidden room. The presidential seal in the floor, the walnut box, and most importantly, both sides of the Gettysburg address fragment. He transferred these images to Eleanor's flash drive, creating a complete digital record of his discovery. Next, he composed a detailed account of how he had found the hidden room, what it contained, and the historical context he had pieced together with Eleanor's help. This document, along with the photographs, would serve as insurance, evidence that could be released to historians and the media if necessary. With these precautions in place, Marcus made his most difficult decision. He would contact the government. Agents voluntarily acknowledge finding the hidden facility, but initially withhold information about the Gettysburg fragment. This approach would allow him to gauge their true intentions before deciding whether to reveal the historically sensitive document. Marcus called the number on Agent Harris's card and left a message requesting a meeting at Willow Creek Ranch. That afternoon, Then he drove into Oak Ridge to arrange the final piece of his strategy. Frank Mercer at the hardware store was surprised by Marcus's unusual request, but agreed to help. A safe deposit box at the Oak Ridge Community Bank? Sure, I can arrange that. My cousin's the manager there. You looking to store valuables? Just some important documents, Marcus explained. Things I'd rather not keep at the ranch while renovations are underway. Frank made a quick call, and within an hour, Marcus had secured a safe deposit box at the local bank, accessible only with his identification and a physical key. There, he deposited a sealed envelope containing a flash drive with all his documentation and a letter explaining the significance of what he had found at Willow Creek Ranch, addressed to Eleanor Whitman, in the event he was unable to retrieve it personally. His final stop was Maggie's Diner, where he found both Maggie and Eleanor having coffee together. They looked up with interest as he joined them. "You look like a man with a plan," Maggie observed, pouring him coffee without asking. "I've decided to meet with the government agents who visited yesterday," Marcus explained. "They're coming to the ranch this afternoon." Eleanor's expression grew concerned. "Are you going to tell them everything?" "Not initially," Marcus replied. "I want to understand their intentions first, why this document has remained classified for so long, and what they plan to do with it if I turn it over." "A strategic approach," Eleanor approved. "But be careful. Governments have long memories and little patience for those who complicate their secrets." "That's why I've taken precautions," Marcus assured them, explaining his documentation efforts and the safe deposit box. "If anything happens, you'll have access to everything I've found." Maggie shook her head with a mixture of amazement and concern. "When you bought that abandoned ranch, I figured you were just another city person with rural fantasies who'd give up within a month. Instead, you've uncovered a presidential secret and are now negotiating with government agents." She smiled warmly. "You're full of surprises, Marcus Bennett." As Marcus prepared to leave, Eleanor caught his arm. "Remember something important about what you found," she said quietly. "That document doesn't just belong to the government, or even to you as the property owner. It belongs to history, to all of us. Whatever you decide, consider its value to our understanding of the past." Her words stayed with Marcus as he returned to Willow Creek Ranch and prepared for his meeting. The Gettysburg Address fragment represented more than just a valuable historical artifact. It was a potential key to unlocking a more complete understanding of one of the most pivotal moments in American history. By the time the black SUV returned up his driveway at precisely 2 p.m., Marcus had made his final preparations. The ranch house looked different now. Parts of the roof repaired, broken windows replaced, the front porch swept clean. It was no longer an abandoned property, but a home in the process of renewal, much like Marcus himself. Agents Harris and Chen approached with the same professional efficiency as before, though Marcus detected a subtle shift in their demeanor, a heightened alertness, a more focused purpose. "Thank you for reaching out, Mr. Bennett," Harris said as they settled in the living room where Marcus had arranged 3 chairs. "You mentioned having information relevant to our historical assessment." Marcus met his gaze directly. "I've found the underground facility beneath this house, the presidential emergency relocation site built during the Cuban Missile Crisis." A moment of silence followed this direct statement. The agents exchanged glances before Chen spoke. "What exactly did you discover, and how?" A hidden room accessed through a pivoting wall in the basement, Marcus explained. It contains a presidential seal embedded in the floor, communications equipment, and documents detailing the facility's construction and operation from 1962 to 1974. Harris's professional mask slipped slightly, revealing genuine interest. That's a significant historical discovery, Mr. Bennett. As I mentioned previously, numerous such facilities were constructed during the Cold War. Most have been decommissioned and declassified, but a few remain sensitive due to their specific purposes or locations. Like serving as an actual presidential evacuation site during the Cuban Missile Crisis? Marcus suggested, watching their reactions carefully. Harris's expression remained neutral, but his posture stiffened slightly. What makes you think that occurred? The documents reference the facility being activated in October 1962, with package designate Alpha on site for 3 days. Local records show unusual security and communications measures during that same period. The agents exchanged another glance, this one longer and more meaningful. Finally, Chen spoke with careful precision. Mr. Bennett, what you've discovered has genuine historical significance beyond what we typically encounter in our assessments. While most emergency relocation facilities from that era have been declassified, this one has maintained a higher security designation due to its unique operational history. You mean because President Kennedy was actually evacuated here? Marcus pressed. Harris sighed, making a decision. That information remains classified, even 6 decades later. What I can tell you is that this facility served a critical national security function during an extraordinarily dangerous period. Its historical significance is precisely why our department monitors properties like Willow Creek Ranch. Marcus nodded, processing this partial confirmation. What happens now? Do you seize the property under some national security provision, classify everything I've found? I've invested what little I had left in this ranch. It represents my chance to rebuild my life. We have no intention of seizing your property, Mr. Bennett, Harris assured him. Our interest is in preserving the historical aspects while ensuring no sensitive materials are compromised. We would like access to document what you've found and potentially to secure any materials that remain classified. That seems reasonable, Marcus agreed. Though I'd appreciate formal documentation of any arrangements we make, including confirmation of my continued ownership rights. Of course, Chen said, visibly relieved by his cooperation. We can prepare those documents immediately. Would you be willing to show us the hidden room now? Marcus hesitated, making his final decision. Before we proceed, there's something else you should know. I found more than just the facility itself. Harris's attention sharpened. What exactly did you find? A document of historic significance, Marcus said carefully. A fragment of the Gettysburg Address in Lincoln's handwriting, with notes on the reverse suggesting a broader conspiracy in his assassination, potentially involving the War Department. The silence that followed was profound. Whatever the agents had expected, this wasn't it. Harris recovered first, his voice deliberately controlled. Mr. Bennett, if you've found what you describe, you've discovered something of extraordinary historical importance and sensitivity. May I ask where this document is now? Secure, Marcus replied, "and fully documented, with copies stored where they would become public if anything happened to me." He held up a hand as Harris began to respond. "That's not a threat, just a precaution. I understand the national security implications, but I also believe historical truth has value." Rather than anger, Harris showed what appeared to be genuine respect. "A reasonable position, given the circumstances. We're not here to threaten or coerce, Mr. Bennett. Our department exists to balance national security concerns with historical preservation. Some secrets maintain their sensitivity even after decades, but we also recognize the public's interest in understanding our shared past." "What would happen to the document if I turned it over to you?" Marcus asked. "A full authentication process conducted by experts from the National Archives," Chen explained. "If verified, it would be properly preserved and studied by qualified historians with appropriate clearances. Some aspects might remain classified temporarily, but the document itself would be recognized and preserved as the historical treasure it is." "Would it eventually be accessible to the public, to historians without security clearances?" Marcus pressed. Harris considered his words carefully. "I can't make promises about classifications beyond my authority, but I can tell you our department's mission includes transitioning historical materials to public access when security concerns diminish with time. A document from the Lincoln era would be a prime candidate for eventual declassification, even with sensitive aspects." Marcus made his final decision. "I'll show you everything I've found, the facility, the documents, and the Gettysburg fragment, but I want written assurances about the preservation and eventual public accessibility of these materials, as well as confirmation of my continued property rights." "Agreed," Harris said without hesitation. "We can prepare those documents now." As the afternoon progressed into evening, Marcus led the agents through the hidden room, showing them everything he had discovered. Their professional demeanor occasionally broke into moments of genuine historical appreciation, particularly when examining the presidential seal and the original facility documentation. When Marcus finally removed the walnut box from the safe and opened it to reveal the Gettysburg address fragment, even the composed Agent Chen gasped softly. Harris, with gloved hands, carefully examined both sides of the document, his expression revealing the significance of what they were witnessing. "This appears authentic," he said quietly. "The handwriting matches known Lincoln documents, and the paper and ink are consistent with the period." He looked up at Marcus. "You've made an extraordinary discovery, Mr. Bennett, one that may indeed require us to re-evaluate aspects of the historical record." By nightfall, formal agreements had been signed, arrangements made for a specialized team to properly document and eventually remove the most sensitive materials, and assurances provided about Marcus's continued ownership of Willow Creek Ranch. The underground facility would be professionally sealed once its contents were secured, but Marcus would retain access rights for historical documentation purposes. As the agents prepared to depart with the carefully packaged Gettysburg fragment, now in a specialized preservation container, Harris turned to Marcus with unexpected candor. "Few private citizens would have handled this discovery with your level of responsibility, Mr. Bennett. You balanced personal interests, historical significance, and national security considerations admirably." Our department would be interested in consulting with you on future historical preservation matters, if you're amenable. The offer caught Marcus by surprise. I'm just a construction contractor who happened to buy the right property. You're considerably more than that, Harris disagreed. You recognize the historical significance of what you found, took appropriate precautions, and negotiated a resolution that serves multiple interests. Those are rare qualities. After the agents departed, Marcus stood on the porch of Willow Creek Ranch, watching their taillights disappear down the gravel driveway. The night was clear, stars brilliant above the silhouettes of distant trees, the air carrying the scent of pine and promise. 1 year later, Marcus stood in that same spot, but Willow Creek Ranch had undergone a remarkable transformation. The house gleamed with fresh paint, new windows reflecting the morning sunlight. The barn had been converted into a workshop where Marcus now designed and built custom furniture, a new business born from his construction expertise and the woodworking, skills he'd refined while restoring the ranch. The property itself had achieved a measure of fame in historical circles after the government had declassified portions of its past as a presidential emergency facility. Though the details of what had occurred during those 3 days in October 1962 remained officially unconfirmed, the ranch had become a footnote in Cold War histories and local tourism materials alike. The Gettysburg Address fragment had been authenticated and was now undergoing careful study by selected historians with security clearances. As promised, portions of its significance had been acknowledged publicly, with scholars noting that it represented an important new resource for understanding both Lincoln's composition process and the historical context of his assassination. Most significantly for Marcus, the skills that had once built his failed construction company had found new purpose in both the restoration of Willow Creek Ranch and his growing reputation as a craftsman, specializing in historically inspired furniture. What had begun as a desperate $1,200 purchase of an abandoned property had become the foundation for a more meaningful success than he had ever achieved in his previous business. As Marcus watched Eleanor's car coming up the driveway, she visited, regularly now, documenting the ranch's history for a book they were co-authoring. He reflected on the strange path that had led him here. The economic collapse that had destroyed his company had seemed like an ending, but it had merely been a transition to something he couldn't have imagined. The presidential seal that remained embedded in the floor of the now sealed underground room served as a daily reminder that beneath the surface of ordinary lives and seemingly abandoned places, extraordinary history and potential lie, waiting to be discovered by those with the courage to start again and the wisdom to recognize value in what others have overlooked. Eleanor stepped from her car, waving a document as she approached. The National Archives just released their preliminary report on the Gettysburg fragment, she called excitedly. They've confirmed it contains elements not found in other drafts. Lincoln was experimenting with additional language about national renewal after conflict. It's already changing how scholars interpret the evolution of the address. Marcus smiled, feeling a now familiar sense of connection to something larger than himself. His desperate gamble on an abandoned ranch hadn't just saved him from homelessness. It had connected him to American history, given him purpose beyond survival, and reminded him that second chances sometimes come in forms we could never anticipate. What others had seen as a worthless, dilapidated property had contained both historical treasure and the seeds of personal renewal. The skills that had seemed insufficient to save his business had proven perfect for restoring both the ranch and his own sense of purpose. "Sometimes," Marcus said, looking from Eleanor to the thriving property around them, "what looks like the end of everything is just the beginning of something better than we could have planned. We just have to be willing to take that first step, even when, especially when, it feels like our last option." Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.